Hi, Noah. Welcome to the GameChangers United podcast. I'm super excited to have you here as a guest. Live from Charlottesville, right?
Yes, Charlottesville, Virginia.
Charlottesville. You see, I'm having some trouble with all the pronunciations of all the cities, but well, welcome. And I'm super excited to have you on the show. And as with every guest, we do a selection up front, like what makes you a game changer and are we the right fit for the podcast. And actually we had so many requests coming in, and for everyone it was really clear, and I was like, yeah, okay. And then I saw yours, and I was like, okay, so this is very new for me, and I love that because we talked about this. We've decided that I'm going to be just as ignorant as possible in this topic, because I think then that's the best way to ask you all the questions to create the best value. But before we dive into that, can you introduce yourself to us?
Absolutely. So my name is Noah Healy. I'm a recreational mathematician, and when I'm employed, I develop algorithms and do data analytics for people. I've right now I'm working on my own business and working on a patent on a new form of financial marketplace. This is effectively the first new financial market design since the Renaissance. And it exploits a lot of the things that people have learned about computational mathematics and game theory. And it actually, at that mathematical level, is thousands of times more efficient than the markets that we've all been using for, well, ever, really. So
Exactly. Yeah.
that's what I do.
So we had a call already last week, because I wanted to get some more information from you to really do justice to the things that you're doing, especially because it is really like the opposite of what I do. The thing that I really liked about what you said back then is that basically you are disrupting the this, let's say, the stable, not the stable, but what is the opposite of fluid?
Solid
Yeah, exactly.
foundation.
The
It's
firm, the
the
solid,
foundation. Yeah.
exactly, the existing patterns, to really create a technology and to explain the psychology behind the existing, and to disrupt it in a way that it becomes flexible and is going to fluid, so it's going to work for us. So this is how I understood and explained what you are doing for the people who are just like me, not on a day-to-day base come in touch with this. But I'm going to deep dive a little bit further with you on this, but I want to address one thing before we deep dive into this, and that is in the GameChangers United podcast, we are a platform, we are like a stage for game changers, and game changers come in different ways, shapes, forms, and also game changers by knowledge. So one of the three types of game changers that I identified is game changer by knowledge. And Noah, you are a game changer by knowledge, and I really love that. So we try to give a stage to everyone, and I try to ask you the right questions, and we are not going to edit any of this. So if there are any questions and you are listening and you think, oh, she should have asked this, or this is a weird question, maybe better not, just know that I'm as ignorant as possible as I can in this episode. So let's go.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Noah, can we, before we really dive into the materials, can you define the audience that would really benefit from listening to this episode?
the first and foremost, the people that interact with marketplaces as part of their business or day-to-day life. And in particular, the people that operate these marketplaces. This is a completely new thing under the sun from them. They generally have no expectation that the way that they operate could change. Certainly that it could change for the better. So this would be very big for them. But broadly speaking, virtually every human on Earth lives off the economy, and having an economy that functions more efficiently and effectively improves sort of everybody's well-being. There's an adage on Wall Street that it's better to do bad in a good year than good in a bad year. Because if the entire market is up 10% and you suck and you're only up 8%, then you're up 8%. But if the entire market's down 10% and you're great and you're only down 8%, at the end of the day, you're down 8%.
Exactly. That is really true, actually. And we can take one big lesson from that, like in business as well. Like sometimes you rather have 80% of something than 100% of nothing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, beating a loss by a couple of points and not losing as much is certainly better than the alternative. But finding those gains is much better. And so by making markets function better, we'll actually unlock economic opportunity across the entire chain of value, from producers to the manufacturers all the way to consumers.
So, and I really enjoyed that you told me a little bit about the history of these markets. So I would say, like, let's dive a little bit in the history of the markets. And we talked about the Netherlands, and we talked all the Renaissance, all these things. And then we're going to talk about the now, and then I want to talk to you about the future. So I think that this way we can really engage our listeners to really engage them in the way of thinking. And is that okay for you?
Absolutely, sure. I can do a sort of brief history of the economics of mankind. So trade has always been with us, but markets that operate the way markets operate today, as you were alluding to, are usually dated to the Renaissance. There are a few reasonable other arguments. The Japanese were setting up forward contracts thousands of years ago. There's a famous case with Democritus, the Greek philosopher, came up with atomic theory. At one point, somebody said, everyone says you're smart, why aren't you rich? And so he did a little climate prediction and bought up all the olive presses, so that when there was a bumper crop of olives that year, everyone had to use his presses to get the oil out, and he basically created a stranglehold on the market. But our sort of negotiables, which is a very weird concept. The idea is that once a contract to trade in the future has been made, that itself becomes a tradable instrument. So the two of us could form an agreement to make a delivery in the future, and then you could sell your half of the agreement to somebody else, at which point I would now be selling to them. And I could sell my half of the agreement to somebody else as well, at which point they would now be selling to the person that you sold to. And so this ability to sort of move around who's on the hook for things goes back to the northern Italian city-states of the Renaissance era. And as far as we know, it happened by accident. Basically, Italian factors, trade factors, liked coffee houses, which were coming into vogue. So they would go down to the plazas and hang out in coffee houses, and chalkboards were coming into vogue, and they would just write up the deals that people were making on the chalkboards, and that's where the stock ticker comes from. And suddenly they had the best price information in the Mediterranean. And since that was, Europe, North Africa, that was the major trading road was the Mediterranean Sea. They became the economic center of gravity, in spite of the fact that they didn't really have the armies or position that places like Constantinople or Egypt or other places that had been the leading society on the Mediterranean in the past had. So that's effectively why the Renaissance happened, because they suddenly got incredibly rich and could build things like Venice and the Dome at Naples and fund Leonardo da Vinci and all the rest of that stuff. The reason it's not still there to this day is that with the discovery of the New World, the Spanish started pulling silver, primarily gold too, but silver in quantities undreamt of from the New World, and bringing it back to their major deep water port, which was in the Netherlands.
There we are.
there was a massive inflationary step across all of Europe as Spain, I believe in about a generation, quadrupled the money supply.
Wow.
So,
one generation.
Yeah, pretty much. It was a 400% increase in the amount of silver in circulation in Europe. That was also sort of the age of piracy getting started when you could effectively pay multiple lifetimes. I think Francis Drake's initial thing had some sort of like million% return because he captured even one galleon of the Spanish Main. It was just crazy. They were building these big ships and just filling them up with silver and floating them across the Atlantic. And so with the money getting cheaper, suddenly trading there became a better deal than trading in the places where it had been happening, in places like Genoa, Venice, and so on. And also that's where we kind of saw the first massive bubble, because you guys like your tulips, and they decided to start trading tulip futures and getting obsessed with breeding tulips that looked cool. And so people started speculating on whether or not tulip bulbs would look as cool as they thought they were going to look. And eventually they were trading on spec for something like, it's the guilder. Is that what you guys have?
Yeah,
there?
the guilder. Yeah.
1 million guilders for a tulip bulb that hadn't actually blossomed yet, because people thought that it might turn out to be a different color than anybody had ever seen before,
like gold or something.
Well, actually, if you're familiar with Alexandre Dumas, The Three Musketeers and the Count of Monte Cristo, he has another book entitled The Black Tulip, in which that's the central thesis, is that everyone's trying to breed a truly black tulip, and like they've got darker and darker reds and stuff, but actual black is going to be the real acme. And so there's a whole it's about, it's against the backdrop of the tulip craziness, if you will. And so then, unfortunately for you guys, you lost your primary position because the English decided that fractional reserve banking was okay, and it's pretty difficult to create money cheaper than by pretending it exists. So then the city of London became the big cheese at that point, and remains so for industrial materials to this day. That happened at just about the same time that the Industrial Revolution kicked off. And so the need for markets in brand new products like coal and steel, not that steel hadn't existed before, but steel in industrial production lots was a new thing at that point. And that's why London has those. The other primary benchmark markets are in Chicago, and that's less a case of coming up with yet an even newer form of cheaper money. But Chicago is actually the on the midline between the closest point of approach of the Mississippi River and the St. Lawrence Great Lakes waterway. So you can take a ocean-going vessel, go in Hudson Bay and come all the way down and hit Chicago one way, or you can go up from the Gulf of Mexico and hit Chicago from the other way. And that, combined with America figuring out how to use the moldboard plow to turn the Great Basin into the world's breadbasket, meant that Chicago had the largest flood of agricultural goods that the world had ever seen. And so it became the primary market spot. And that's why today, effectively, we have primary benchmarks concentrated in Chicago and London, with a handful in New York, and a few other places where very high regional dominance exists. And that's what creates the prices of everything from your wool sweater to the lumber that you build a deck out of to the cereal in the morning.
So is it true that what you are saying, that the game you want to change is to disrupt that, to make other systems or people, or like led by information, more in control of the prices? Yeah. So I would have two caveats. So it's systems, not people, that I'm looking to disrupt, and control of the prices isn't really the goal of a marketplace. The goal of the marketplace is to find or discover the prices. So the key economic insight is that prices are a communication tool. There is some price level which conforms to reality, in which people will make the amount of stuff that people want. And if the price that your economy is operating on is different from that price, then that won't happen. So if beds cost $10 million, then people will be very willing to make beds. People will be very unwilling to buy beds. If beds cost $5, people will be very willing to buy them and very unwilling to make them. So for any product,
whether it's a more retail product like a bed or a chair or a shoe, or a more commodity product like iron ore or gasoline.
Yeah.
A price exists where supply and demand will balance off against each other. And operating your economy at or near those points will enable people to be productive, to have the things that they desire and produce things that other people desire. And operating away from those points will stop you from being able to do that. And you'll get the sort of horror stories that we, have from the 20th century of the communist dictatorships, where, people were doing lumbering, but when the supply train came to give them their axes, it would be empty, and then they'd be on the hook for producing, 400 million board feet with no axes. So they'd just stick a twig in there and say it was 400 million board feet, and and on and on and on, and you wind up with wildly underproductive economies and a lot of people not having any kind of a life to speak of.
So this is why you said in the beginning, this theory, the things that you're doing, is applicable to the economy in the widest sense of the word, right? It's not only for just the like the industrial organizations, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. The financial system currently costs on a global basis over $1 trillion a year. And that cost is worth it because we're getting that price information that we need to operate our economies. But if that cost was lowered, that money would be available for doing other things. Are you familiar with the story by Bastiat of the broken window fallacy?
No.
So Bastiat has this story. It's called Things Seen and Unseen. And he posits the idea of a village with a cobbler, and somebody throws a brick through his window. And he says the sort of shallow economist will look at that and say, look at all the economic activity that's produced, because the cobbler bought a new window, and so then the glazier had money and bought a goat for his family so that he could have, and then the goat herd had something, and this chain of economic activity gets going off. But Bastiat says, wait a minute, let's think about this for a minute. The cobbler has the money, and if he doesn't have to buy a new window, he could buy something he actually wants. And some other chain of economic activity could have been created. And in this world, we still have a chain of economic activity and a window. Where the window wasn't destroyed in the first place. And so if we can find out what these prices are at less cost, then we can have our economy, and we can go on and have extra economic activity on top of it. And with the numbers that we're talking about here, the economic growth rate would fundamentally increase. So, for example, right now in my country, the economy is contracting slightly. The size of that contraction is around a third to a quarter of the size of the overhead cost of our financial system. So if our financial system cost half as much, we wouldn't have a contracting economy right now. We'd have an expanding economy right now.
So what is the price if you don't do it like this?
Well,
think we're
that gets
losing a little
into,
bit.
yeah, that gets into
Yeah.
the immediate term and the long-term issues. In the immediate term, if we don't change, things stay the way they are. Unfortunately, the existing markets over the last generation have become more expensive as the financial sector has actually grown as a share of the marketplace. And the reason for that is that technology isn't a neutral thing. Technology is that we can integrate into things creates advantages for the people that can integrate, and for the people that can't integrate, it doesn't do as much good. So this refers to mechanical technologies, it refers to information technologies, and what computers have done is made it much easier to operate the sort of hedge funds and other market intermediaries than it has been to trade against those market intermediaries.
But this is a whole different strategy, right? If you trade against, or you, well, how do you say, like create for?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
a completely different market approach.
Right. And so what we can expect to see is that the expense of the marketplace will keep increasing as our communication and computing technology continues to improve. And that expense comes directly at the cost of the capacity of our economies to grow. So, I just said that if we had halved that overhead cost rather than having a contracting economy, we'd have a growing economy. If instead we let things continue to slide, and in another generation we've doubled that cost again, we would never have an expanding economy because the overhead cost would be so great that even the best years we had would still be a declining economy.
Exactly, and so we can do good in the bad market, but still in the end we don't have anything. We just learned that in the beginning, right?
Exactly. Yeah. If we get over that tipping point, then it will be pretty much just a downward slide.
So are we too late?
Not at all. Economies are, in fact, still growing, and the tipping point. Japan has had three. They're entering their fourth lost decade. So it's not necessarily the case that getting over the tipping point causes everybody to sort of instantly keel over. There's a lot of ruin in a nation, as Adam Smith said. So we're not there yet. We have a potential solution, and the great thing about math is other smart people might be able to look at this and come up with other potential solutions. But we do have a severe issue that does need to get addressed.
So, because basically what you're saying is it has an expiration date. If we don't do anything, then we are reaching an expiration date at this moment, and then we will have another, let's say, crisis, in what way, shape, or form it is. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm actually saying is that we're seeing those crises. We've seen the markets become less stable over the last generation.
Yeah.
And it's not as if market crashes were totally unknown. They've been popping up. The Great Depression was very famous, but to have multiple severe broad market crashes, in a single generation, that's actually pretty rare. And historically, the sort of lessons learned phase and the fixes that have gone in have actually done things to make the next market crash not resemble the previous market crash. Whereas we don't even have time for that anymore. We have severe market crises sort of popping up once a decade. And so that sequence of activity, we're not really working on solutions anymore, because
So this raises I think an interesting question. So what role do you see for the educational market, the education industry, let's say, in this part? Because we are educating the next generation. So how this is just brainstorming, like, how do you think they could use this knowledge that you just shared with us as a benefit for future generations to come, using education, for example, as the intermediary to get the information there?
Well, education is in a very nasty spot at the moment. As an industry, they have gone all in on pragmatism, and there's a cool essay about sort of the impracticality of pragmatism, that's relatively apropos. Learning how to do what you're doing in what has become the modern environment of continually discovering that what you're doing isn't a great idea and better ideas should be done instead, is effectively just reinforcing wrongness, because the goal shouldn't necessarily be to figure out how to do what's going on, but rather to improve what's going on.
Exactly.
And a pragmatic educational approach isn't a great approach to that. And to some extent, education has sort of held itself up as a specialization, which is also very damaging in a sort of modern environment, because learning needs to be a part of living. And so the notion that learning is the provenance of sort of teachers in institutions that you go to and pay versus a more organic and widespread across the whole of society, with mentorship and apprenticeships plus educational institutions, plus books and everything else. But at the same time that education is in some sense becoming less useful and more insular, we also have the internet, which is this enormous fund, if you care to use it in this fashion, of actually useful information. I have a friend who's a farmer and pretty mechanically minded. Every time he needs to fix something on his farm, he can find web pages, videos, step-by-step instructions being done by people in circumstances effectively identical to his own, that talk about which problems they had in pictures and video of exactly how to do what needs to be done. And he can just do it.
So there's a lot of information, and a lot of things are accessible on the internet. I mean, but you can only find out if it's the right information if you try. So let's say that he's trying the things that he sees.
Right. So there's a lot of potential value available in curating or rating this information. But while there's a lot of social value attached to that, there isn't necessarily a lot of economic value attached to that. And the attempt to lock up economic value behind certain trade certificates, which are now of declining value because they're largely about picking up the tools that exist today and the methods that exist today in a world where we expect neither of those things to be applicable, is quite the challenge. So education is in a weird place.
So do you see a role for yourself there?
Only to the extent that I'm currently engaged in an educational crusade to attempt to teach people a new view of economics and tools to work with economic systems that are brand new. But yeah, I don't know what kind of curriculum or lecture capacity I'd have. I've
Well, I can only speak for myself. You already managed to engage me for the second time for 45 minutes on a topic that I actually had nightmares about. I told you, like, I had really literally had a nightmare a year ago that my university called, and they were like, Meerte, you didn't graduate after all because you didn't pass your statistic test. So if you can engage me in this topic, now I'm just making a joke, but I really feel like you have something here to share, and this is the reason why we are talking as well. Is I think it's kind of unique, and this is really a compliment for you that you have so much specific knowledge, but yeah, you can also make it accessible and understandable for people that are not into the material that at the level that you are. So I really feel like there should be more education on this, and also on an earlier age, and using the systems and using the informational era as a perfect tool to distribute the knowledge in an easy and in a fast way.
I agree with that. I think we would be much better served having sort of a transparent substrate of systems that operate in ways that are clear enough that they could be explained to children, possibly sort of teenagers, certainly, and could be engaged with at that level. I think we're seeing a lot of systems turn out to claim that they operate transparently and clearly, but are actually fairly corrupt in their internal connections. And as we're learning about that corruption, there's a lot of very justified anger that's being generated, and so that social friction, that doesn't strike me as a good idea for a society that wants to keep itself together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's because I'm really like my radars are starting. They are making like extra hours today talking to you, because I think when you look at it from a more abstract perspective, and from a business perspective, or from whatever you want to call it, there are so many. There are so many parts in the chain where you can add this as valuable information, but also where it's impacted. So it is impacted in our day-to-day life. It is actually closer to us than we think.
Yeah. If you're familiar, this is several years back, the LIBOR scandal. There's this thing that used to exist called the London Interbank Offered Rate, and it was published, I believe, weekly. And the way it worked was a guy that worked for one of the major newspapers in the city of London would call his friends and ask them, man to man, what are you doing? And then he'd add those numbers up and average them together and publish the average. And if you own a credit card or a house mortgage or ever got a business loan, then the rate that you paid was based on the number that he published. And it emerged that they were just making it up. They would talk to each other and say, hey, sure, we know that this is the number, but if you published a number that was a little bit higher than that, then I'd, be able to vacation in the south of France. So why don't you do that? And they did. Or if you published a couple points lower, my boss wouldn't go bankrupt and I'd get a bigger bonus. Let's make that happen. And so they did.
So there was a lot of personal interest involved. That's what you're saying? Or?
Yeah. My favorite, several of the emails leaked out, which is how we sort of found out about this.
Okay.
And my favorite one was somebody had written an email saying, thanks a lot. I'll remember this in my memoirs. And the response email was, I would prefer this never see print in any form ever. And that was published in like the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times and like everything all over the world.
Wow. Okay, so then you're onto something, right? When you see something like that.
Right. But that was a big deal. Like I said, if you've ever engaged in a credit transaction, if you've ever had a bank account and earned interest on that bank account, what you got paid or what you had to pay to access the financial system was based on that number, which was a lot.
Yeah, and this is actually a really good bridge to take a step, to even go a step deeper into your method. And you call it the coordinated discovery. What was the word again?
Market.
You see? I'm sorry. I'm still like with my head with all processing all the information. But this is exactly what I want our listeners to understand is that there is a way to do it differently, and this is something that you created, you discovered, and you actually created like a very accessible way to explain it. And this is the document I'm going to, so for everyone who is listening to this podcast only on Spotify, try to find the episode, or try to find it on YouTube as well, because then you will see my screen share with the document that Noah created to walk us through the whole idea behind the system, like the theory that he built. I'm going to share my screen. Coordinated discovery markets. There we go.
Yes.
So, Noah.
So you might want to maximize the.
How can I do that?
That's it. You got it.
Here?
It's full screen now. I can't see the rest of your desktop anymore.
No, that's fine. You only see this, right? Only
yes.
See, yeah. So this is good?
Yep.
Yeah. So can you walk us through? I'm just going to click whenever you say.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's just my name and logo. You can click through there.
I did. I'm not sure if you can see this one.
So that's the elevator pitch. That's pretty straightforward. I'll read it off for the listeners. Build a more efficient commodity exchange by incentivizing the most informed participants to provide pricing information for all rather than trading for profit.
Yeah. And this is already very important, to provide information rather than trading for profit. So I think this is really the key of the things that we're going to talk about. Using this as an example.
Right. So we've got wheat trade between farmers and bakers. You can go to the next phase there. And so this gets into what we were talking about before, price levels. So in this example, at $12.50, the farmer will sell 21 bushels of wheat, and at 15 he'll sell 42 bushels of wheat. But at $12.50, the baker will buy 26 bushels of wheat, and at 15 he'll buy 19 bushels of wheat. So if we take a look at this, at $12.50, 21 bushels of wheat can trade because the farmer will only sell that much. And at 15, 19 bushels of wheat will trade because the baker will only buy that much. Now, these are sort of crude numbers to make it easier to understand what's going on. In a broader marketplace with many, many players, a more contiguous interval price will exist. But since the existing market focuses on really individuals, this will give you a sense of kind of what's actually going on buried inside the billions of transactions that occur.
Mm-hmm.
So informed speculators know everything. We just got a guy with a big bag of money here. And let's go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So if you knew everything and you wanted the biggest rake off, what you'd do is you'd buy 19 bushels from the farmers at $12.50 and then sell those 19 bushels to the bakers at $15. And so every bushel that gets traded, you're making $2.50.
Yeah.
And the farmers are a little unhappy because they'd prefer to have 3 more bushels to trade. But the bakers are about as happy as they can be because at $15, 19 is all they want.
Exactly. And for the people who are only listening, so in the sheet, it says markets, the informed speculators pay sellers the least money possible and charge the buyers the most money possible. And we see like the image on the left of the bushels for $12.50 and being sold on the right for $15. So that's basically what we are doing today in every market, in every industry.
Yes. So next.
Yeah.
So yeah, in this world, the speculator's profit is the baker's loss, because if the baker could find that person, they wouldn't have to pay that money. And there's some waste, as I was just saying. So go to the next one.
Yeah.
So in my system, the speculators would provide information at a very high rate of return in order to facilitate the best trade possible. And so let's, I believe the next slide will actually see what that looks like. So the best possible price is the $12.50 price. That's what maximizes the value of what's getting actually transacted. So let's go to the next one.
Yeah.
So in this world, we sell all 21 bushels for $12.50. So the farmer doesn't have their sort of 3 missing. The baker keeps their $47.50. And now we come back to the next slide.
We have a little delay between the slides because we're doing this live.
Yes.
And then you find step 3.
Right. And so now what happens is because they've been facilitated, they pay a commission to the information, and that commission can have a much higher rate of return than the trading value used to have. So
and does it also mean that it's also the prices become more flexible? So based on the inflation and everything that's going on, the prices can change, so the information changes, or?
Yes, it does. In fact, one of the things about current pricing, like if you ever hear about oil, it's quoted per barrel. Wheat is quoted per bushel, but things aren't actually traded that way. Things are traded in effectively unit transport systems, like train cars or boxes that could go on ships and so on. So what's actually happening is that while a bushel can move by, say, 1 penny at a time, an actual contract will be for a large number of bushels. Let me see, what is it off the top of my head? I think bushels are about 90 pounds, and I think it's something like 10 tons. So something like 220 bushels or something is a contract. I can't remember exactly, but I do remember that it's effectively based on how much you can pack into a train boxcar. And so what that means is that, if it's say 200 to 1, a 1 penny move means that the contract has to move by $2, which means that the minimum difference between contracts at different prices is actually $2 per contract, over and above whatever fees being paid. However, because this is not interested in having contractual spreads for the middlemen to be able to take advantage of, it can actually focus into prices that are between those levels. And some contracts have, $10, $20 minimum differences between steps.
But also I'm thinking now, but maybe this is a blunt question, or well, I'm going to ask it anyway.
Yeah, go ahead.
But it also affects the cost for transportation, for example. So it makes a difference if you can transport the goods in one train, or you need two trains, right? I mean, so in the end, effectively, you will pay more or less.
So one interesting thing is that because transportation has become so standardized on these sort of train car scale boxes that we move around, that there are actually markets in transport. So there's something called the Baltic Dry Index, which is basically what it costs to ship a shipping container around the Baltic North Sea area. And that is a commodity that gets traded on markets. And that market price is then used as the baseline for how other shipping situations occur around the world, because ocean travel is pretty similar just about everywhere. So this kind of marketplace could actually be used for that transport cost as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is so interesting. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Yes. And so what my formula does is allows us to measure how valuable the forecaster's information was. And so we can maximize reward to the forecasters that are the most accurate, and they'll make the most money.
Yeah. It seems so simple, Noah. It makes so much sense, even for me. No, I'm just. It makes so much sense. Like, what is the reason that it's not here yet? I mean,
well, unfortunately, while at this conceptual level, it's fairly simple. The formulas required to measure information are effectively differential equations, and the the entire concept of information as a physically measurable thing is something that physics only actually discovered in the 20th century. So the mathematical tools, the physical understanding, and the technological capacity to carry out these things really absolute best go back to, say, the 90s, and for practical purposes probably much more like the mid 2000s. So I made my discovery probably about 10 years after it was possible to make this discovery.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. 10 years after you could.
So the key is
that no, go on.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you're a little choppy.
That we are interrupting each other. So you go on.
Okay, so talking about this one, whereas before the speculators were making $47.50, they had to buy the wheat ahead of time, and so what they were getting was sort of $2.50 per bushel on the 19 bushels, and that was $2.50 on an investment of $12.50. So that's basically a 20% return, which isn't so bad. However, in this circumstance, while you might shrink the pile, let's say instead of having $47.50 available, there was only $20 available. Previously, they would have had to have almost $250 of investment capital to go after that. In this case, we could up the rate of return so that while they're only going after $20, they might only need $20 to go after it. And so with that much higher rate of return, they could take the other $230 of their investment capital, invest it in other things. Yeah. If they can do even half as well as they used to be doing on that investment, then overall they're better off. If they can do 90% as well, they're much better off. And if they could find, say, 9 other markets operating like this one, in which they can get 100% returns, then suddenly they're 5 times better off than they used to be, and they're making the exact same amount of money, or investing the exact same amount of money, but at a vastly higher rate of return. So that key of rate of return versus total value actually offers a better carrot for these people, because right now none of them actually gains the lion's share of that overhead cost. And so being able to up their rate of return actually is more valuable to them than growing the marketplace as a whole.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's also a little bit the with now, of course, with the digital currency idea, it has some resemblance, right?
There is some connection. A couple of the projects that are trying to get this technology integrated into them are blockchain-enabled systems. Blockchain recognizes, or Bitcoin and Ethereum recognize the weakness of having a currency that's being manipulated by governmental forces.
Exactly.
So they say, what if we had a currency that was not so manipulated? Wouldn't that make things better? It's certainly possible, and indeed reasonable, that it would do so. Unfortunately, my observation is that the problem that we're having right now has less to do with currencies being manipulated, which is definitely happening and is certainly bad, but with the marketplaces themselves being driven to become more expensive. And And that's the thing we were talking about before that sort of has an expiration date, because if the market expense gets to the point where it exceeds the value of the marketplace, then we're in an economic death spiral.
Exactly. And then we are back to where we started, maybe even worse.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah. So,
and that's, so the result is this, sellers sell more for more money, buyers buy more for less money, and forecasters get higher returns. That's a stronger and more prosperous economy.
Yeah, and I think what I really like about it is the reciprocity in it. So it becomes more equal and it becomes more fair this way.
Well, that's basically Adam Smith's insight into why free market economics works, is that reciprocity and fairness create an environment where more people are engaged. And with more people, you sort of have more brains and more intelligence, and you can afford to specialize. That's one of the great challenges in a modern society, is that specialization has a lot of cost to it. And so there needs to be a reasonable expectation of payoff of that cost. And that's quite challenging in an environment where you actually want change to occur in a way that would invalidate certain specializations.
Mm-hmm. So can I ask you two more questions before we because we are already talking almost an hour. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm open.
Yeah. So my first question is, who, and maybe it's too difficult to answer, but who would be against this?
So the primary losers in the existing space are liquidity providers. There's a very lucrative sort of insurance trade that exists, where you're taking advantage of this exploitation because you have a lot of capital and you can effectively afford to do that. That this creates an environment that effectively negotiates its way past the existence of these people. So people who have more money than information can't take advantage of participation and have to take their money someplace else. That's not a positive. And then secondly, since this is all about noise reduction, there's the phrase from Game of Thrones, chaos is a ladder. If your goal is actually to create large-scale disruption to be able to sort of pick up the pieces and feed on the bodies, a system that brings things together and makes things more predictable isn't very useful to you. And so there are various degrees of illicit noise producers. It's a fairly open secret that a fair amount of money laundering happens through the existing markets. CDM effectively has no capacity to support money laundering. I don't know how much is actually going on, either as a fraction of money laundering or as a fraction of existing trade. But that would be bad for the people that would have to change their illegal businesses to some other model. But yeah, those are the two classes of primary losers.
Yeah, and it's good to address those as well, because it automatically makes also very visible where you can really gain from this this whole philosophy, like this whole system that you created. my last question for you is, because I know you've been working on this for many years and you've invested a lot of time and money and energy and knowledge and everything in it. If you could choose one or two places to start with this, to start manifesting, to start leveraging from all this information in the market, where would that be?
Well, if I could choose, I would want those benchmarks that we were talking about before to give it a trial run, because they have the greatest scope and reach and the greatest capacity to test and then spread. But at the end of the day, wherever it starts is where I want it to start, just sooner rather than later. Because structurally, this has a lot of advantages over existing markets. So once we have them up and in competition with the markets, just as the Venetians and Genoans and Napoleons ate the economy of the Eastern Roman Empire and so on, these systems will eat the economy of Chicago and New York and the city of London, because it's a better marketplace. It's a place where if you switch, you'll be making more money.
Exactly.
And so to that end, I just had a very good conversation with a micro lender in Egypt yesterday, and got 3 other projects that I've been working with for the last few months, also scattered around the world. And whoever gets stood up first, that's who I'm.
That's amazing. And I really love this about talking to so many different people. So I wanna reach out to all the listeners now as well. So if they have an industry, if they have a company that they think would be really beneficial or benefit from all the work that you're doing, feel free to reach out to us, and we will. I will personally make sure that you will get in touch with Noah, and also what the intention of the GameChangers United is that we unite people on a similar. On a mission to make the world a better place, but that are complementary with how they do it, right? So, and this is also the reason why we are setting up the network mastermind, to create like groups of 3-4 people pre-selected by me, because I want you guys to talk to each other. And this is for all the listeners. When you are interested in that, we will put all the information in the podcast as well. And Noah, I am definitely, I know someone in my network in the Netherlands that I would really want you to meet. I'm going to contact him first to see if he's up for it. But I think this could be something really interesting to at least run a pilot maybe in some industries, or just to get things starting, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the entire thrust, is that this needs to work voluntarily to function. And so that's the question that remains, is given the option, will people take it?
Exactly. So I have actually someone in my network who is a director of one of the biggest commodity companies. So they buy all the let's say the stuff for bakeries and stuff like that. I cannot really find the English word, but anyway, I think this would be very interesting if you guys talk and take it from there. So with this being said, Noah, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And I know it's only like maybe 2% of all the information and knowledge that you have. For me, it feels like a lot, but in a good way. And I hope that, I am sure that we created some really valuable content and a really nice episode for people to listen to, and hopefully to start rethinking their view of the economic world, right? That's what we were aiming for.
Thanks for having me. And I very much hope that people do listen, take this on board, and start thinking about these issues, because we're in a time and a place now where the capacities of our technology are actually literally unimaginable, and that's creating a lot of the problems that we have now. But it also means that we have the capacity to find solutions that couldn't even have been dreamt of just one generation ago.
Exactly. Sometimes you need 10 years or maybe a whole generation to be able to see it, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And well, maybe we can do a follow-up in a few months from now to see where things are. And if the listeners, if the audience have any questions, we will put the link to your website in there as well. And I think they can just reach out to you directly. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of people are really motivated to look at it from a different perspective, and I can't wait to hear people's reactions as well. So if you have any feedback for us on this episode, positive, constructive, we are open for that. And Noah, thank you so much again, and for everyone who's listening or watching this on YouTube, well, hopefully I'll see you at the next episode. Bye bye.